All right. Hey guys, this is a screencast I'm recording for those who were not able to log in because Zoom went off the rails this morning. Apologize for that. I hope that things get better moving forward. So, a couple things I started out a class talking about today. Some takeaways from last week, our first week of distance learning. One thing biggest thing is personal responsibility, the importance of personal responsibility, right? When you're in the classroom and maybe you are on your phone scrolling through Instagram or something, or texting your friend in the class, the teacher will be like, no, 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 go put your phone in the pockets, or maybe they'll keep your phone away from you for the duration of the class by putting it in the phone jail or the parking lot, as I call it. We can't do that now. So what you need to do is have the responsibility and the knowledge that, hey, if I don't listen to what the guy's saying right now, if I'm texting my friends, then I'm not getting anything out of this lesson. And then the test is coming up and I am going to be in trouble. So it's personal responsibility, being able to decide that there's a time and place for everything, including texting your friends, talking to your friends, scrolling through your social media feeds. There's a time and place for everything, and that time and place is not during the time when the teacher is talking. They give us 40 minutes, and generally the first 5 to 10 minutes is dealing with waiting for everyone to come in because because they don't give us time between the class periods, which is an interesting decision. But it ends up, we don't have a full 40 minutes, we have about 35. And so during those 35, you need to listen to what the teacher's saying, and you have personal responsibility. The same goes for turning things in. When you're in the classroom, you have to look that teacher in the eye and say, I didn't do my homework, and maybe look down in shame. That can't happen now, right? So you either turn it in or you don't. And I'm going through my CTLS submissions, and I've got some classes where I've got only half the people doing anything, and that is very worrisome because here soon they're going to tell us that we can start putting grades in Synergy. And when that happens, there's going to be a lot of people with some zeros from the first 2 weeks of school, and you don't want to set yourself up like that. So there's even like the flip grid, the very first thing you had to do that took all of a minute to answer 5 or 6 questions. Some people still haven't even done. So if you're having trouble with the technology, if you can't figure out how the links work, shoot me a message either through Remind or email. But get it done. That shouldn't have taken. That should have been done on the first day. And yet there are people who still haven't done it. I think I only have 20 responses in one of my classes out of 28. So personal responsibility. You've got to turn stuff in. And I know how it feels to be in an online class and not have a teacher standing over you saying you didn't do your homework, and you having to say no, sir, or whatever. Because in college, I had the same problem. I had a hard time with online classes, with turning stuff in, because I didn't have a teacher standing over me saying, hey, this is due. How could you not have done that? And so this is me saying it right now. Turn your stuff in. It's up to you. Your grade is up to you. Your success in this class is up to you. This is not like it was in the spring when it was pretend school that you could only do stuff that would improve your grade. That's not what's happening right now. If you're not turning stuff in, it's going to go into zeros in Synergy. Okay? I will get off my soapbox now. With that being said, also tomorrow we're going to start keeping attendance per class. So the way I'll be keeping attendance is I'll look at the report. Zoom, you can run a report of who was there, and I will just check people off if you were at the Zoom meeting. If you weren't in the Zoom meeting, you get marked absent. And so in order to get that absence marked off, you need to have, if it was technology issues or something like that, and you want it fixed, your parent has to send an email to our attendance clerk to get that fixed. So just come to class, and just like when we're in physical class, the simplest way to avoid attendance problems is by attending. So again, personal responsibility, and it's a big lesson to learn so early, but it's a lesson that you need to learn. At least you're not one of the 3rd or 4th graders that's needing to learn this, because they're needing to learn it too. You're in 10th grade. You should be able to take personal responsibility for your education. Okay. Soapbox finished. So today we are going to be talking about a poem called Identity. It's by Julio, Noboa, Palanco. It's the more I've read it, the more it becomes one of my favorites. It's really good. So we're going to go over it. We're going to analyze it, and then there is a document that you need to download. You might have already done it, but it has the poem, and then it has some comprehension questions, and it follows with some questions to help you write an emulation of the poem or an imitation. Basically, you will model a poem after identity. But let's read it first, analyze it, make sure you understand it. So follow along. I am going to minimize me and pull up my PowerPoint. Okay? So this has the poem in it. All right, so looking at it, we're going to start from the beginning. It is by Julio, Noboa, Palanco. I don't like that view. Let's swap. That's better. All right. So, the way I like to read poems, I like to read it through once, pause, think about it, read it through a second time. So that's what we're going to do. Okay? Let them be as flowers, always watered, fed, guarded, admired, but harnessed to a pot of dirt. I'd rather be a tall, ugly weed, clinging on cliffs like an eagle, wind wavering above high, jagged rocks. To have broken through the surface of stone, to live, to feel exposed to the madness of the vast, eternal sky, to be swayed by the breezes of the ancient sea, carrying my soul, my seed, beyond the mountains of time or into the abyss of the bazaar. I'd rather be unseen, and if then shunned by everyone, than to be a pleasant-smelling flower growing in clusters in the fertile valley, where they're praised, handled, and plucked by greedy human hands. I'd rather smell of musty green stench than of sweet, fragrant lilac. If I could stand alone, strong and free, I'd rather be a tall, ugly weed. Think about it. Okay. We got a certain message on the first read through. Let's read it through again. This time, focus a little bit more on the figurative language that you see. Similes, metaphors. There's a huge extended metaphor that runs throughout the poem. Okay? Watch for it. All right? Take a sip. Okay. Let them be as flowers, always watered, fed, guarded, admired, but harnessed to a pot of dirt. I'd rather be a tall, ugly weed, clinging on cliffs like an eagle, wind wavering above high, jagged rocks. To have broken through the surface of stone, to live, to feel exposed to the madness of the vast, eternal sky, to be swayed by the breezes of the ancient sea, carrying my soul, my seed, beyond the mountains of time or into the abyss of the bazaar. I'd rather be unseen, and if then shunned by everyone, than to be a pleasant-smelling flower, growing in clusters in the fertile valley, where they're praised, handled, and plucked by greedy human hands. I'd rather smell of musty green stench than of sweet, fragrant lilac. If I could stand alone, strong and free, I'd rather be a tall, ugly weed. Okay. So looking at the poem, first thing you want to do is think about paraphrase, the literal meaning of the poem. What is the overall meaning or message of the poem, do you think? Some answers today have ranged from be yourself, could be the message. The idea that I want to be an individual and not just another bleeding member of the herd, not just not like everyone else. One person said that when it says, let them be as flowers, them could be, the popular kids in school that all dress the same way, wear their hair the same way, the makeup the same way, because otherwise they're going to get ridiculed. And they're terrified of that because they're weak little flowers. Whereas this weed is proud to be an individual, proud to be its own person, proud to cling on the cliff like an eagle, soaring, letting the wind blow through its leaves. Right? It talks about to be swayed by the breezes of the ancient sea, carrying my soul, my seed beyond the mountains of time or into the abyss of the bazaar. We're going to talk about that passage a little bit more, full of imagery. But the general overall meaning, be an individual, don't just be one of the crowd. That sometimes it's better to be different. It's better to be unique than to be like a daisy where they all look the same and they're all in rows and there's not a variation amongst them. Okay? Say that's a good summation, a good paraphrase. All right, so let's talk about mood and tone. They're two different things, but often get confused for the same thing. So the mood is in me, the reader. The tone is in you, the author. Okay, mood, me, think mood is in me, tone is in you. Okay, so the mood, how did this poem make you feel versus the tone? What was the author putting into the language? What words was the author using in order to create a tone? Usually when we're thinking about tone, we're looking for adjectives, simple adjectives, right? So a tone could be hopeful, it could be optimistic, it could be pessimistic, it could be depressive, it could be sarcastic tone. A lot of teenagers are very good at a sarcastic tone. It could be a humorous tone. Maybe it's a funny poem. So what is the tone of this poem? Answers have ranged today. Some people said it kind of had a sad tone, which I thought was interesting, that there are some sad words when he talks about being alone. But I countered that maybe it's sad but also hopeful, because there's a strength in being alone. There's a strength in being different, being strong and free. For me, I see the tone to be very optimistic, to be very like self-sufficient, like I can do anything I put my mind to, kind of thing. That kind of wide-eyed optimism that's just taking the world by the horns and doesn't care what other people think about him or her. Mood, for me, the mood, it's a bit melancholy, a little bit of sadness to it, but also, again, the idea that it makes you feel like, you can rise above what other people's perceptions are of you. Even though they think you're a stinky weed, so what? That's great to be a stinky weed. You don't want to be one of those smelly flowers that's going to get plucked by greedy human hands. Okay? Let's talk about figurative language. Figurative language is anything that is not literal. So a simile, a metaphor, personification, or hyperbole. Give you a minute maybe to kind of look at this and try to find a simile or metaphor, and what the meaning is of it. Maybe just pause it and take as long as you need, and then I'm going to just continue. Okay, so some similes I noticed right off the bat, right? Let them be as flowers. Who are them? We don't quite know yet, but as flowers is right away. Let them be as flowers. And he says, I'd rather be a tall, ugly weed. Okay, so right away we get this opposition of flower versus weed. And it's carried throughout the poem. It's extended throughout the poem. That's what we call an extended metaphor. It's when one metaphor goes throughout the entire thing. And we see that here with the idea of they are flowers, I am a weed, a strong, proud weed, whereas they are flowers that need to be tended and eventually are going to be plucked by greedy human hands. Other similes or metaphors. Talks about clinging on cliffs like an eagle, wind wavering above high, jagged rocks. The eagle provides us as a universal symbol for freedom, right? The idea that you're free flying above these vast mountaintops. Again, in this line, we return to the idea of the weed is broken through the surface of stone. Maybe that surface of stone could be a metaphor for something, perhaps the childhood that this person came from, maybe the circumstances of their upbringing. Maybe they grew up in a poor area and are trying to break through from what they were born into, something like that. So it talks about being exposed to the madness of the vast eternal sky. It's interesting. He talks here about the madness of the sky, and then down here it's the abyss of the bizarre, which I find to be pretty interesting in their own right. Interesting metaphors. Okay. The breezes, see, to be swayed by the breezes of the ancient sea, what could that ancient sea symbolize? Perhaps the ancient sea, the idea that we're all a part of this vast sea of humanity that we're all from, we all are a part of. And so we all have common experiences, all of us who are part of this ancient sea. But this one person, is carrying his soul, his seed, he calls it. Again, calling back to that weed metaphor that's casting its seeds out. Carrying my soul, my seed beyond the mountains of time. Mountains of time, that's a metaphor. The idea that time is this huge structure, this mountain. And then he says the abyss of the bizarre. An abyss is a pit, a bottomless pit often, that you can't see what's down there, but he knows there's something bizarre down there. We talked about what the abyss of the bizarre could represent in class today. One person said it could be, what if it was like addiction? What if it was drugs, for example? Many people get sucked into the abyss of the bizarre, whether that's drugs or alcohol or maybe some kind of addiction that their parents went through, and maybe the speaker is afraid that he or she is going to fall into this abyss that maybe they've seen loved ones fall into. It could mean anything. That's the beautiful thing about poetry, is it means different things to different people. Okay? He continues with the flower versus weed metaphor here, but then elaborates on the flowers that they're growing in clusters in the fertile valley, where they're praised, handled, and plucked by greedy human hands. What could the greedy human hands represent that are praising, handling, and plucking? I talked about how, people have to be tended just right? They all have to have their hair the same way, makeup the same way, dress the same way, and so that they can be praised and handled and plucked eventually by greedy human hands. I gave the example of Britney Spears, right? She was a famous singer, got really famous when she was a teenager, got even more famous with her next subsequent albums, and the paparazzi would not leave her alone. They hounded her everywhere, and it caused her a nervous breakdown. They were chasing her children and taking pictures of her children, and she shaved her head at a certain point just to kind of get away from all of them. And everyone was like, oh, she's gone off the deep end, and maybe she did. But you know what? She came out the other end. She came out the other side. Good for her. Good for her. But to me, that's an example of someone who was praised and handled and is a beautiful flower that everyone loved and was trying to get a piece of and plucked her by greedy human hands. A lot of times that is the sad side effect of celebrity, is this idea that your life is just completely destroyed, just completely taken away. Yeah, you're famous, but you can't go pick up a gallon of milk at the grocery store without having a horde of photographers taking your picture when you're there. Okay? For me, that's what that kind of made me think of, but for you, it may make you think of something else. Okay? He talked about the musty green stench of the weed, again, continuing that metaphor, that extended metaphor, and repeating, if I could stand alone, strong and free, I'd rather be a tall, ugly weed. Looking at imagery, what vivid images are presented. We already talked about the vivid image of the eagle flying over the high, jagged rocks. There's also the image of the ugly weed that's clinging onto the cliff. Have you ever seen the side of a mountain, the side of a cliff, and there's just a tree growing out of it? And you're like, how did that seed find that one spot that have just enough soil and got just enough water to actually succeed and live? Whereas all the other seeds that hit the side of that cliff wall just fell down into the ocean or something. That one seed took germination and became a tree. It became this weed. And it says he's clinging on cliffs. That powerful alliterative statement, clinging on cliffs, it's a powerful verb there. It shows the strength it takes to be an individual, to be that weed clinging to the cliff. And then further down, he talks about broken through the surface of stone, right? Broken through what many would not be able to, would not have the strength to break through, including those flowers that people praise and handle so much. Okay? Another imagery we spoke about earlier. Imagery, by the way, is all five senses. So, all of them. Hear, sight, taste, smell. So we see here where there is some imagery in the second to last sentence. I'd rather smell, but the imagery is the smell, right? I'd rather smell of musty green stench than of sweet, fragrant lilac. All right, so maybe he's saying by being his own person, other people may turn their noses up at him, not literally, this is figurative, right? But that imagery of the stinky weed versus the fragrant flower, that he would rather be the stinky weed that's going to be left alone, but be strong and free, tall, and ugly in his own right. Not literally, but not other people's perception of the way he should be, and he finds strength in that. Yeah? Okay. Sound devices, we want to look at sound devices as well and why they used them. We already mentioned one example of alliteration with clinging on cliffs, wind wavering, the surface of stone, we see some alliteration there too. What effect does that have? Using these strong verbs in these alliterative phrases helps us to remember them, for one thing. Okay. Moving on to the theme. So what is the theme of this poem? Again, someone said earlier, be yourself. And it's a very simple theme, but that's exactly what it's saying, right? Be who you are meant to be. If that's a weed, be the best weed you can possibly be. Don't be upset that you're not a flower. Don't be mourning your own life and think that your own life has no value because you're not a lilac. Be your own person is what I would say is the theme of the poem. What do you think is the theme of the poem? And again, returning to this idea of an extended metaphor. So if you've ever heard that expression, extended metaphor, it's just a metaphor that is extended throughout the length of a particular piece of literature. In this case, a poem. So the metaphor extends from the first line all the way down to the last. And the metaphor, the extended metaphor, is flowers versus weeds, right? I want to be a weed, they are flowers, I'd rather be a weed. And it definitely supports that theme of being an individual. What would be some other extended metaphor ideas? There's a little on the worksheet that you are going to download. It talks about possibly coming up with some alternative ideas for an extended metaphor for your own emulation of this poem. Okay? So I'm going to stop here. As far as this poem goes, I want you to download the document from, you don't have to download this PowerPoint, but download the document that has the comprehension questions on it. And then at the end, there's a part where it wants you to emulate the poem. All I want you to do today is to read over that poem again, answer the comprehension questions. Tomorrow, you'll have time in class to work on your own version of the identity poem. And then the whole packet with questions and the poem is due on Wednesday. Okay, so I hope this helped. And if you missed class this morning, I apologize. Zoom had a worldwide outage, they said. So hopefully that won't happen again. But hopefully this video will help you with today's lesson.